The desperate cries pierced through the earth like a wounded animal's last plea, cutting through Quentin Xander's thoughts as he guided his weary horse down the dusty trail toward Ash Fork, Arizona. He hadn't expected to hear anything besides the late April wind whispering through the mesquite and the occasional call of a red-tailed hawk. But the sound, distinctly human and undeniably female, stopped him cold in his tracks. It was 1885, and Quentin was looking for nothing more than a fresh start after 3 long years driving cattle across the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona Territory. At 32, his body bore the marks of his profession: calloused hands, a perpetual squint from staring into the sun, and a jagged scar running across his left forearm, a souvenir from a stampede outside of Tucson. The last thing he needed was trouble, but something in that muffled scream tugged at his conscience. Pulling back on the reins of his chestnut gelding, Dusto, he cocked his head to listen. The sound had come from somewhere to his left, away from the main road leading into town. His gray eyes narrowed as he scanned the landscape, eventually settling on a modest homestead about a quarter mile off the trail. White clapboard gleamed in the late afternoon sun, the house looking peaceful enough, but beside it sat a smaller structure, half buried in the earth, a root cellar. Another cry, fainter this time, confirmed his suspicions. Quentin hesitated only briefly before turning Dusto toward the property. He wasn't one to meddle in others' affairs, but he'd seen enough injustice in his years on the frontier to know when something wasn't right. As he approached the homestead, the front door of the house swung open. A woman stepped onto the porch, her back straight as a fence post and her gaze sharp as she watched his approach. She wore a high-necked blue dress, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that accentuated her angular features. Though she couldn't have been more than 25, there was something hard in her expression that made her appear older. "Can I help you, mister?" she called out, her voice carrying a practiced sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. Quentin touched the brim of his worn Stetson. "Afternoon, madam. I was passing by and thought I heard someone calling for help." The woman's smile tightened. "Must have been the wind playing tricks. We get powerful gusts through here this time of year." Just as she finished speaking, another cry came, unmistakable this time from the direction of the root cellar. Quentin's eyes flicked toward the source, then back to the woman whose face had gone pale. "That's my sister's old hound," she said quickly. "Been howling something fierce since she left. Poor thing misses her." Quentin dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Doesn't sound much like any hound I've ever heard." "Sir, you're trespassing on private property," the woman said, her pretense of hospitality evaporating. "I'll have to ask you to leave." "I'll be on my way just as soon as I check on that dog," Quentin replied, his tone civil but firm. "Wouldn't want an animal suffering needlessly." The woman's hand disappeared behind her skirt, and Quentin tensed, wondering if she was reaching for a weapon. But before either could make another move, the sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of another rider. A young man in a dusty black suit pulled up on a lathered bay horse, his face flushed with exertion. "Faith, where is she?" he demanded without preamble. "Where's Hazel?" The woman Faith blanched. "Henry, you're early, the wedding's not until tomorrow." Quentin looked between them, pieces falling into place. Another cry emanated from the root cellar, louder this time. "Hazel!" Henry shouted, leaping from his horse and running toward the sound. Faith lunged forward, revealing the small revolver she'd been concealing. "Stay back." "She doesn't want you anymore." Quentin moved with the quick reflexes of a man accustomed to danger, knocking the gun from her hand before she could take aim. Faith screamed in frustration as Henry reached the root cellar and threw open the wooden doors. "Hazel," Henry called into the darkness. "Are you down there, Henry?" A weak voice floated up from below. "Oh, thank God, she locked me in here yesterday." Quentin kept a firm grip on Faith's arm as Henry disappeared into the cellar, emerging moments later with a young woman in his arms. Her wedding dress was smudged with dirt, her golden brown hair falling in tangles around a face that, despite its current pallor, possessed a quiet beauty that struck Quentin immediately. "She was going to marry you wearing my dress," Faith spat, struggling against Quentin's hold. "Our mother's dress. It was supposed to be mine." "Faith, you need help," Henry said, his voice a mixture of pity and disgust as he set Hazel gently on the ground. The bride swayed on her feet, and Quentin instinctively reached out to steady her with his free hand, still maintaining his grip on Faith. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, though they'd never met before. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Quentin Xander," he offered, suddenly aware of how rough he must look after weeks on the trail. "Hazel Jenkins," she replied, managing a smile despite her ordeal. Behind them, Henry was examining the root cellar, his face growing darker by the second. "There's hardly any water down there and no food at all. Faith, what were you thinking?" Faith's laugh was bitter. "That she'd die down there, of course. That you'd come looking for your precious bride and find her gone, run off like the faithless creature she is." Hazel's face crumpled. "How could you, after everything we've been through together?" "Because he was supposed to be mine," Faith shouted, tears streaming down her face now. "Everyone knows I loved Henry first. Everyone knows we were meant to be together until you came along with your pretty face and sweet ways." Quentin felt Hazel stiffen beside him, her amber eyes widening in shock. "I never knew," she whispered. "You never said a word." Henry looked equally stunned. "Faith, that was years ago. We were children." "Not to me," Faith said, her voice breaking. "Never to me." A tense silence fell over the group, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the nearby cottonwoods. Quentin, feeling distinctly out of place in this family drama, cleared his throat. "Someone should fetch the sheriff," he suggested. Henry nodded grimly. "I'll ride into town." He turned to Hazel, taking her hands in his. "Will you be all right if I leave you for a bit?" "I don't want to leave you alone with her, but I'll stay," Quentin offered, surprising himself. "Until you get back." Henry looked at him gratefully, then mounted his horse and galloped toward town. Left alone with the two sisters, Quentin wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Faith had gone quiet, her rage seeming to collapse in on itself, leaving behind something hollow and defeated. Hazel, meanwhile, had begun to tremble, the shock of her ordeal finally setting in. "Let's get you inside," Quentin said gently. "You need water and rest." Faith laughed mirthlessly. "Playing the hero, Cowboy, don't bother. She's engaged to Henry." Quentin ignored her, guiding Hazel toward the house while maintaining his grip on Faith. Inside, the home was modestly furnished but neat, with a few personal touches: handmade quilts, pressed wildflowers in frames that spoke of care and attention. He sat Faith firmly in a kitchen chair. "Don't move," he ordered, then helped Hazel to a small sofa in the adjacent sitting room. "There's rope in the barn," Hazel suggested weakly, seeing his dilemma of how to keep Faith contained while tending to her. Quentin nodded, heading out briefly to retrieve it. When he returned, he bound Faith's hands, ignoring her stream of bitter invective. Once she was secured, he fetched water for Hazel, who drank it gratefully. "How long were you down there?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Since yesterday afternoon," Hazel replied, her voice stronger now. "Faith invited me over to make final preparations for the wedding. When I arrived, she offered me tea." She paused, swallowing hard. "It must have been drugged, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the dark, locked in the root cellar." "You're lucky I heard you," Quentin said. "I was just passing through on my way to find work in Ash Fork." Hazel studied him, taking in his trail-worn appearance. "What kind of work?" "Whatever I can find," he admitted. "Been a cowhand most of my life, but I'm looking to settle somewhere for a spell." "Well, Mr. Xander, it seems Ash Fork owes you a debt already," she said with a small smile. "You saved the dressmaker's life." "You're a dressmaker," she nodded. "I have a small shop in town. It's how I met Henry. I made a dress for his sister's wedding last year." From the kitchen, Faith made a disgusted sound. "And wormed your way into his heart while you were measuring him for a new suit." Hazel flinched at her sister's words. "It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? You knew how I felt about him. Everyone knew." "I didn't," Hazel insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "You never once mentioned Henry to me that way." Quentin watched the exchange with growing discomfort. There was clearly years of history between these two women, a tangled web of emotions he couldn't begin to unravel. "How long have you two been sisters?" he asked, attempting to shift the conversation. Hazel wiped at her eyes. "We're not blood relatives." My parents died when I was 16, influenza. Faith's family took me in. Her mother had been friends with mine. So I watched while my parents treated you like another daughter, Faith said bitterly. Gave you my clothes, my room, my place at the table. They loved you just as much, Hazel protested. But never more, Faith replied, never the way I needed. The conversation lapsed into uncomfortable silence. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, shadows lengthening across the wooden floor. Quentin wondered what was taking Henry so long. Ash Fork wasn't more than a 20-minute ride from here. As if reading his thoughts, Hazel spoke up. The sheriff might be out on his rounds. Sometimes it takes hours to find him. Quentin nodded, then rose to light the oil lamps as darkness crept into the house. The warm glow cast soft shadows, making the modest home feel almost cozy despite the tension that hung in the air. Are you hungry? He asked Hazel. I could fix something simple. She looked surprised at the offer. You cook. Been fending for myself since I was 14, he replied with a shrug. Nothing fancy, but I won't poison you. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, unlike some people in this house. From the kitchen, Faith glared but said nothing. Quentin found bread, cheese, and some dried beef in the pantry and assembled a simple meal. As he worked, he became aware of Hazel watching him, her gaze curious and perhaps a bit wary. I'm not what you expected, am I? He asked without looking up. I'm not sure what I expected, she admitted, but a cowboy who comes to my rescue and then makes me dinner wasn't on the list of possibilities when I woke up this morning. He brought the food over, setting a plate on the small table beside her. Life has a way of surprising us. Indeed it does, she murmured, her eyes troubled as she glanced toward her sister. They ate in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Quentin found himself studying Hazel when she wasn't looking, the graceful curve of her neck, the way her long eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks in the lamplight. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet strength about her that he admired. He just cleared their plates when the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness of the evening. Moments later, Henry burst through the door, followed by an older man wearing a sheriff's badge. Hazel, Henry rushed to her side, gathering her in his arms. Are you all right? I came as quickly as I could. I'm fine, she assured him, though Quentin noted she didn't quite meet his eyes. The sheriff, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper mustache, moved to where Faith sat bound to the chair. Faith Blackwell, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. You can't prove anything, Faith said coldly. We found the laudanum in your dresser drawer, Henry said, and Hazel's account will be enough. As the sheriff untied Faith only to replace the rope with handcuffs, she shot a venomous look at Hazel. I hope he's worth it, sister dear. I hope he's worth everything you're about to lose. The sheriff led Faith outside to his waiting horse, where a deputy waited to escort her to the town jail. Henry and Hazel followed, standing on the porch as Faith was helped onto a second horse. The wedding is off, obviously, Henry said quietly once Faith was out of earshot. At least for tomorrow. Hazel nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim light from the open door. It's for the best. We all need time to process this. Henry turned to Quentin, extending his hand. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Xander, if you hadn't come along when you did. Quentin shook his hand firmly, just glad I could help. You must stay here tonight, Henry insisted. It's too late to ride into town now, and you deserve a proper bed after what you've done for us. I couldn't impose, Quentin began, but Hazel interrupted. Please stay, she said softly. I don't want to be alone here tonight. Something in her voice made it impossible for him to refuse. All right, he agreed, just for tonight. Henry looked between them, a flicker of something concern, perhaps, or jealousy crossing his features before he masked it with a polite smile. I'll come back in the morning to check on you, Hazel. We can talk then. After Henry left, an awkward silence fell between Quentin and Hazel. The enormity of the day's events seemed to crash down on her all at once, and she swayed slightly where she stood. You should rest, Quentin said gently. Where can I sleep that won't cause any impropriety? Hazel gestured toward a door off the sitting room. That's Faith's room. I'll take the guest room upstairs. Quentin nodded, though the thought of sleeping in the bed of a woman who had just been arrested for attempted murder wasn't particularly appealing. Still, he'd slept in worse places. If you need anything in the night, he offered awkwardly, just call out. I'm a light sleeper. Thank you, Mr. Xander, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. Quentin, he corrected her. After all this, I think we can use first names. A tired smile touched her lips. Quentin then, good night. As she disappeared up the narrow staircase, Quentin found himself staring after her, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He'd never been one for fairy tales or damsels in distress, but there was something about Hazel Jenkins that had gotten under his skin in the short time he'd known her. Shaking his head at his own foolishness, he entered Faith's room, removed his boots, and stretched out on the bed fully clothed. Tomorrow he would ride into Ash Fork as planned, find work, and put this bizarre detour behind him. Hazel would sort things out with her fiancé, and life would go on. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, her face appeared in his mind not as he'd first seen her, dirt-smudged and terrified, but as she'd looked in the lamplight, her amber eyes reflecting a soul as complex and beautiful as the Arizona sunset. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of Faith's bedroom. Quentin woke with a start, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came rushing back to him. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair, then reached for his boots. The smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted him as he emerged from the bedroom. Hazel stood at the stove, her back to him, her hair braided neatly down her back. She'd changed from her ruined wedding dress into a simple blue skirt and white blouse. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. She turned, a spatula in hand, and offered him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied, moving to the kitchen table. "You didn't have to cook for me." "It's the least I could do," she said, turning back to the stove. "Besides, I needed the distraction." Quentin watched as she efficiently plated the food, noting the grace with which she moved despite the lingering effects of her ordeal. There were shadows beneath her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much. "How are you feeling?" he asked as she set a plate before him. Hazel sank into the chair across from him, cradling a cup of coffee between her hands. "Physically, I'm fine, just tired and a bit sore." She stared into her cup. "Otherwise, I don't know what to feel. Betrayed, certainly. Angry, sad, confused." "All reasonable responses to finding out your sister tried to murder you," Quentin said, cutting into his bacon. A startled laugh escaped her. "When you put it that way, it sounds absurd. Like something from a penny dreadful." "Life is often stranger than fiction," he replied, offering a small smile. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of cutlery against plates and the distant call of mourning doves outside. "What will you do now?" Quentin finally asked. Hazel sighed, setting down her fork. "I don't know, return to town to my shop, try to explain to everyone why the wedding isn't happening." She paused, her brow furrowing. "Face the gossip and the stares. And Henry." Something flickered across her face, regret, perhaps, or resignation. "I don't know about that either. After yesterday, everything feels different." Before Quentin could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced a visitor. Moments later, a knock came at the door. Henry stood on the porch, looking as if he'd hardly slept. His clothes were the same as the day before, his hair uncombed. "May I come in?" Hazel stepped back, allowing him entry. "Of course." Quentin rose from the table, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "I should get going, town's waiting." "Please," Henry said, gesturing for him to stay. "What I have to say concerns you too, Mr. Xander." Curious, Quentin resumed his seat as Henry joined them at the table, declining Hazel's offer of coffee with a shake of his head. "Faith has confessed everything," Henry began without preamble. "Not just about drugging you and locking you in the cellar, but about her plans afterward. She was going to pose as you, Hazel. She had a dress made an exact copy of your wedding gown and was planning to wear a veil throughout the ceremony so no one would notice the difference until it was too late." Hazel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's insane." The sheriff found the dress hidden in her wardrobe along with a vial of something the doctor says would have killed you within days. Henry ran a hand over his face. "She's being transferred to the Territorial Asylum in Phoenix. The doctor says she's suffering from a kind of mania." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Quentin watched as Hazel processed this information, her face paling. "I had no idea she was so unwell," Hazel whispered at last. "None of us did," Henry said, reaching across the table to take her hand. But this changes everything, Hazel. We can't get married, not now. The scandal would follow us forever. Though his words were gentle, Quentin didn't miss the flash of hurt in Hazel's eyes. You're calling off the wedding permanently? Henry nodded, his expression pained but resolute. My family's business depends on our reputation. My father is already talking about moving us to California to escape the gossip. He squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, Hazel. You deserve better than this. Quentin felt a surge of indignation on Hazel's behalf. After everything she'd been through, Henry's primary concern seemed to be his family's reputation. I see, Hazel said, slowly withdrawing her hand from Henry's. And when do you leave? By the end of the week. Henry looked genuinely regretful. Father's already making arrangements. So quickly, she murmured. I want you to have this, Henry said, reaching into his pocket and extracting a small leather pouch. He emptied its contents onto the table, a modest pile of coins and bills. It's not much, but it might help you start fresh somewhere else if you decide to leave Ash Fork. Hazel stared at the money, her expression unreadable. That isn't necessary. Please, Henry insisted. After what my family has cost you, your family. She interrupted, a spark of anger finally breaking through her composed facade. Faith isn't your family, Henry. She's mine, even after everything she's done. Henry looked taken aback. I only meant, I know what you meant, Hazel said, her voice softening, but I don't need your charity. I have my shop, my skills, I'll be fine. An uncomfortable silence fell. Quentin, feeling increasingly out of place in this intimate conversation, cleared his throat. I should really be on my way. Henry stood abruptly. Yes, of course, and I should go as well. There are arrangements to be made. He turned to Hazel, hesitating before leaning down to press a chaste kiss to her cheek. Goodbye, Hazel. I truly am sorry, she nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. Goodbye, Henry. After Henry left, Quentin found himself alone with Hazel once more. She remained seated at the table, staring at the money Henry had left despite her refusal. He doesn't love me, she said suddenly, looking up at Quentin with eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't think he ever did, not really. Quentin hesitated, unsure what to say. I'm sorry. Don't be, she replied, wiping at her eyes. I'm not sure I loved him either, not the way one should love the person they're marrying. She gave a rueful laugh. Isn't that a terrible thing to admit? Honest, not terrible, Quentin said gently. Better to realize it now than years into a marriage. Hazel studied him, her gaze thoughtful. You speak as if from experience. Not my own, he clarified. My parents, they married young for practical reasons, spent 20 years resenting each other until my father finally left. He shrugged. Made me wary of the institution. And yet here you are, rescuing prospective brides, she teased, a genuine smile briefly illuminating her face. Just happened to be passing by, he reminded her, returning her smile. Speaking of which, I really should get to town if I hope to find work before nightfall. Hazel nodded, rising from the table. Of course, I need to return as well to my shop. She hesitated. Would you mind if I rode in with you? I'd rather not make the journey alone right now. I'd be happy for the company, Quentin replied, surprised by how much he meant it. They prepared to leave, Quentin saddling Dusto while Hazel packed a few belongings and secured the house. Faith's horse, a gentle gray mare named Willow, stood patiently as Hazel adjusted the saddle. What will happen to this place? Quentin asked as they mounted their horses. Hazel looked back at the homestead, her expression thoughtful. I don't know, it belongs to Faith, technically. Her parents left it to her when they passed last year, she sighed. I suppose it will fall to me to decide as her only family. They rode toward town at a leisurely pace, the morning sun warming the spring air. After a while, Hazel broke the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. What kind of work are you looking for in Ash Fork? She asked. Anything honest, Quentin replied. I've mostly worked cattle, but I've done a bit of everything over the years. Blacksmithing, carpentry, even tended bar for a spell. A man of many talents, she observed. Jack of all trades, master of none, he countered with a self-deprecating smile. What about you? How does one become a dressmaker in a place like Ash Fork? Hazel's expression brightened as she spoke about her craft. I've been sewing since I was a girl. My mother taught me and I discovered I had a knack for it. After my parents died and I came to live with Faith's family, I started making dresses for the ladies in town to earn my keep, eventually saved enough to open my own shop. Impressive, Quentin said sincerely. Not many women manage to support themselves independently out here. It hasn't been easy, she admitted. But I love what I do. There's something magical about creating something beautiful with just fabric and thread. As they rode, Quentin found himself increasingly drawn to Hazel's quiet strength and resilience. Despite everything she'd endured, losing her parents, being betrayed by her sister, jilted by her fiancé, she maintained a dignity and grace that impressed him. The town of Ash Fork came into view as they crested a small rise, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with scattered homes spreading outward. Though modest in size, it was larger than many of the settlements Quentin had passed through in his travels. "Welcome to Ash Fork," Hazel said, gesturing toward the town. "Not exactly San Francisco, but it's home." "Looks like a fine place," Quentin replied. As they rode into town, Quentin became aware of the curious stares directed their way. Word of Faith's crime and Henry's broken engagement had clearly spread rapidly. "Ignore them," Hazel murmured, her back straightening as she lifted her chin. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." They stopped first at Hazel's dress shop, a neat storefront with Jenkins dressmaking painted on the window in elegant gold lettering. A bell tinkled as they entered, the space tidy but clearly closed for what was to have been Hazel's wedding and honeymoon. "Home sweet home," she said, gesturing to a door at the back. "I live in rooms behind the shop." Quentin nodded, suddenly realizing their time together was coming to an end. The thought left him with an unexpected sense of loss. "I should let you get settled. Thank you for your hospitality." "Wait," Hazel said as he turned to leave. I know this might seem forward, but if you're still looking for work, I could use some help." Quentin raised an eyebrow in surprise. In a dress shop, a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Not with the sewing, obviously. But the shop needs repairs. The roof leaks when it rains, and the display window sticks something terrible. The storefront could use a fresh coat of paint, too." She twisted her hands nervously. "I've been putting it off because I couldn't afford to hire anyone, but with the wedding canceled." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The money she'd saved for her new life with Henry could now be put to other uses. Quentin considered her offer. It wasn't cowboy work, but it was honest labor, and the thought of spending more time in Hazel's company was undeniably appealing. "I'd be happy to help, Miss Jenkins." "Hazel," she corrected him with a small smile. "After all this, I think we can use first names." "Hazel," he agreed, returning her smile, and so began Quentin Xander's unexpected stay in Ash Fork. What had started as a simple passing through became a prolonged visit as he tackled the various repairs Hazel's shop required. He took a room at the local boarding house, rising early each morning to work before the day grew too hot. The townspeople regarded him with curiosity at first, whispering behind their hands as he carried lumber to Hazel's shop or balanced precariously on a ladder to fix her roof. But as days turned into weeks, they grew accustomed to his presence. The story of how he'd rescued Hazel from her sister's plot had spread throughout Ash Fork, earning him a certain respect among the locals. May arrived, bringing with it warmer days and the occasional thunderstorm that tested Quentin's roof repairs. Henry and his family departed for California as planned, their absence creating a void in the town's social circle that was quickly filled with new gossip and concerns. Hazel threw herself into her work, creating new designs and accepting commissions with renewed vigor. Quentin often found himself watching her as she bent over her sewing, her nimble fingers guiding fabric through her machine, a look of intense concentration on her face. There was an artistry to her work that he admired, a precision and care that reminded him of his mother's rare moments of contentment when she would embroider by the fire. One evening in late May, as Quentin was finishing up painting the last section of Hazel's storefront, she emerged from the shop with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've been at it since sunrise," she said, offering him a drink. "You should take a break." Quentin accepted the glass gratefully, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. "Almost done. Just want to finish this section while the light's still good." Hazel leaned against the wall beside him, sipping her lemonade as she admired his work. "It looks wonderful, Quentin." "The whole place does. I can't thank you enough." "Just doing what I was hired for," he replied, though her praise warmed him more than he cared to admit. "Well, you've gone above and beyond," she insisted. "The shop hasn't looked this good since I opened it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant laughter of children playing and the occasional creak of wagon wheels as the town prepared for evening. "The sheriff came by today," Hazel said finally, her voice quiet. "Faith is settled at the asylum in Phoenix. He said she's calm for the most part. They're hopeful that with time and treatment she might improve." Quentin set down his paintbrush, turning to face her. "How do you feel about that?" Hazel sighed, her gaze distant. "Relieved that she's getting help, sad that it came to this." "Guilty sometimes, though I know logically that none of this was my fault." She shook her head. "Mostly, I just wish I'd seen the signs earlier. Maybe if I'd realized how deeply unhappy she was." "You can't blame yourself for not being a mind reader," Quentin interrupted gently. "From what you've told me, Faith kept her feelings well hidden for years." "I suppose," Hazel conceded. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever felt like you completely misjudged a situation? Like you were blindly walking one path, only to discover too late that it was entirely the wrong direction?" Quentin considered her question, thinking of his own meandering life. "More times than I can count," he admitted. "I've never been good at staying in one place, at committing to one direction. Always thought the next town, the next job would somehow be better, more fulfilling. And was it? Better, I mean, rarely," he said with a rueful smile. "Usually just different, same troubles, different scenery." Hazel studied him, her amber eyes thoughtful. "Yet here you are, still in Ash Fork after nearly a month. That's something of a record for you, isn't it?" "It is," Quentin agreed, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the fading light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. "Must be the company." A blush crept up Hazel's cheeks, but she didn't look away. For a moment, Quentin thought about closing the distance between them, about discovering if her lips tasted as sweet as they looked. But the memory of her broken engagement, still so fresh, held him back. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until the town's church bell broke the spell, announcing the 6 o'clock hour. Hazel stepped back, clearing her throat. "I should let you finish. Will you join me for supper afterward? I've made a stew." "I'd like that," Quentin replied, picking up his paintbrush again. As she disappeared back into the shop, Quentin found himself smiling. For the first time in years, the idea of staying in one place didn't fill him with restlessness. Ash Fork, or more specifically, the woman whose shop he was painting, had somehow begun to feel like somewhere he could belong. The weeks that followed saw a subtle shift in Quentin and Hazel's relationship. With the shop repairs completed, there was no longer a professional reason for their daily interaction, yet they continued to seek each other's company. Quentin found work at the town's livery stable, his experience with horses making him a valuable addition to the business. The position kept him in Ash Fork and provided a steady income, both novelties in his nomadic existence. June brought intense heat to the Arizona territory, the sun beating down relentlessly on the dusty streets of Ash Fork. On particularly scorching afternoons, Hazel would close her shop early and join Quentin for walks along the creek that ran behind the town, where the cottonwoods provided welcome shade. It was during one such walk, as they sat on a fallen log watching minnows dart through the shallow water, that Hazel broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "Faith's house," she said, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "I need to decide what to do with it." Quentin nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The sheriff says I could sell it as Faith's legal guardian. Use the money to expand my shop, perhaps." She sighed, flicking droplets from her fingertips. "But it feels wrong somehow. It was her parents' home, and before that, her grandparents'. So much history." "What are the alternatives?" Quentin asked. Hazel shrugged. "Keep it, I suppose, rent it out maybe, or—" She hesitated, glancing at him sideways. "I've been thinking about moving there myself." This surprised him, after what happened. "It's not the house's fault," she said with a small smile. "And living above the shop is convenient but cramped. The homestead has land I could plant a garden, maybe keep a few chickens." Her expression grew more serious. Most importantly, it would be mine. Something permanent, something no one could take away. Quentin understood the appeal. In a world where women had few rights and little security, owning property represented freedom. If that's what you want, I think you should do it. It would mean leaving town, she pointed out. Being somewhat isolated. You seem to handle isolation well enough when I met you, he said, half teasing, despite being locked in a root cellar. Hazel laughed, the sound bright against the backdrop of rustling leaves and flowing water. Fair point. She grew quieter, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. The thing is, Quentin, I'm not sure I want to be out there alone. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Quentin felt his heart rate quicken as he considered his response. Hazel, he began carefully, are you asking me what I think you're asking? She met his gaze directly, a hint of vulnerability in her amber eyes. I'm asking if you might consider a more permanent arrangement in Ash Fork with me. Quentin took a deep breath, the moment feeling weightier than he'd anticipated. I care for you, Hazel, more than I've cared for anyone in a long time. But, she prompted, hearing the reservation in his voice, but I've never been good at staying put, he admitted. I'd hate to make promises I can't keep. Hurt flickered across her face, quickly masked. I understand, it was presumptuous of me to suggest. No, Quentin interrupted, taking her hand in his. It wasn't presumptuous, it's just… Marriage is a big step, especially for someone with my track record. Hazel's eyes widened. Who said anything about marriage? Quentin blinked in confusion. I thought, when you said a permanent arrangement. A laugh bubbled up from Hazel's throat, growing until she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Oh, Quentin, I was asking if you'd consider being my tenant. The homestead has a small caretaker's cabin out back. I thought you might live there, help with the heavier work around the property in exchange for reduced rent. Heat crept up Quentin's neck as embarrassment washed over him. Oh, I see. Hazel's laughter subsided, but her eyes still danced with amusement. Did you really think I was proposing marriage after everything that happened with Henry? When you put it that way, it does seem ridiculous, Quentin admitted, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Not ridiculous, Hazel said, her expression softening as she squeezed his hand. Premature, perhaps, but not ridiculous. Their eyes met, and Quentin felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day, when he'd heard her screams and followed them to her rescue. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Hazel met him halfway, her lips soft against his as they shared their first kiss in the dappled sunlight beside the creek. When they finally parted, Hazel's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. So, she said, a little breathlessly, about that caretaker's cabin. Quentin laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. I think I could be convinced to take it. By July, they had settled into a new routine. Hazel continued to run her dress shop in town, making the journey back and forth each day on her mare, while Quentin split his time between working at the livery stable and making improvements to the homestead. The caretaker's cabin, while small, proved more than adequate for his needs, and he took satisfaction in repairing the property that had once been the site of such darkness. The root cellar remained locked, neither of them having the heart to use it after what had transpired there. Instead, they built a new storage shed for preserves and vegetables from the garden Hazel had planted. As summer progressed, so did their relationship. They took things slowly, both aware of the gossip that still occasionally followed Hazel through town. Ash Fork was small, and memories were long. Some still whispered about the scandal of Faith's crime and Henry's departure, though the more sensational details had thankfully remained private. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Hazel received a letter that would change everything. It's from my aunt in San Francisco, she said, breaking the seal and unfolding the paper. I wrote to her months ago before everything. She was supposed to attend the wedding. Quentin watched as Hazel's expression changed while reading, moving from curiosity to surprise to something that looked like hope. What is it? He asked when she finally set the letter down. She wants me to come to San Francisco, Hazel replied, her voice filled with wonder. She owns a dress shop there, a proper ladies' boutique on a fashionable street. She says business is booming and she needs someone with my skills to help her meet the demand. That's wonderful, Quentin said, though he felt a pang at the thought of her leaving. There's more, Hazel continued, picking up the letter again. She wants me to bring my designs, says they could start a new line with my name on it. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Quentin, this is the opportunity of a lifetime, to have my work recognized in a city like San Francisco. You have to go, he said without hesitation, reaching for her hand. Your talent deserves a bigger stage than Ash Fork can provide. Hazel squeezed his hand, her expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. But what about us? What about the homestead, everything we've built here? Quentin hesitated, knowing his answer would change the course of both their lives. The old instinct to run, to avoid commitment, tugged at him briefly before fading in the face of what he knew to be true. He loved Hazel Jenkins, and the thought of life without her had become unimaginable. I hear San Francisco has horses too, he said finally, a slow smile spreading across his face. Might be they need experienced, stable hands. Hazel's eyes widened. You'd come with me, if you'll have me, Quentin replied. Though I warn you, city living might take some getting used to. With a cry of joy, Hazel threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking them both off the porch swing. I was so afraid you'd tell me to go without you, she confessed against his ear. Quentin pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I've spent most of my life running from place to place, never putting down roots. But with you, Hazel, I've found something worth staying for, even if staying means moving across the country together. The kiss they shared then was different from those that had come before, deeper, filled with promise and certainty. When they finally broke apart, the last rays of sunlight had disappeared, leaving them in the soft glow of twilight. I love you, Quentin Xander, Hazel whispered against his lips. My unlikely hero. And I love you, Hazel Jenkins, he replied, the bride who got away. Their laughter mingled in the warm summer air, carrying across the desert landscape that had brought them together in the most unexpected of ways. The preparations for their departure consumed the next month. There was the homestead to sell, the dress shop to close, and countless goodbyes to be said. The people of Ash Fork, who had witnessed their story unfold, offered well wishes tinged with regret at losing two of their own. Sheriff Matthews purchased the homestead, planning to use it as a way station for travelers. He promised to maintain the improvements Quentin had made and to keep the garden Hazel had planted. The caretaker's cabin would house a deputy, extending law enforcement's reach beyond the town limits. As for Faith, Hazel visited her at the asylum in Phoenix before leaving Arizona. The reunion was difficult. Faith alternated between lucidity and confusion, but Hazel found a measure of peace in seeing her sister receiving proper care. She arranged for a portion of the homestead's sale to be set aside for Faith's future needs, ensuring she would never want for anything should she eventually recover. On a crisp morning in late August, Quentin and Hazel boarded the train that would take them first to Los Angeles and then north to San Francisco. As the whistle blew and the train lurched forward, Hazel leaned against Quentin's shoulder, watching through the window as Ash Fork receded into the distance. Having second thoughts, he asked softly. Hazel shook her head, her amber eyes clear and certain. Not one, you. Quentin smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Only about whether I should have proposed before we left. Hazel sat up straight, turning to face him. What did you say? With a wink, Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I said, I'm wondering if I should have done this before we left Ash Fork. The other passengers in their car pretended not to watch as he slid from his seat to one knee in the narrow aisle of the train car. The box opened to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. Hazel Jenkins, Quentin said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need rescuing or protection, but because I can't imagine facing any future in San Francisco or anywhere else without you by my side. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The other passengers broke into applause as Quentin slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to claim a kiss from his future bride. Later, as the train cut through the Arizona desert, Hazel examined her ring in the sunlight streaming through the window. "It's beautiful," she said. "But how, when?" "I sold Dusto," Quentin admitted. "Figured we couldn't take him on the train anyway, and Mrs. Wilkins at the boarding house has a daughter who's been coveting that horse since I arrived." He shrugged. "Seemed fitting, somehow the horse that brought me to you helping to seal our future together." Hazel leaned her head against his shoulder once more. "I'll miss him, and Ash Fork in its way." "We can always visit," Quentin assured her, "or even return someday if San Francisco doesn't suit us." "With you beside me," Hazel said, twining her fingers with his, "I think any place would suit me just fine." Their journey to California passed quickly, the changing landscape outside their window mirroring the transformation in their own lives. The dusty plateaus of Arizona gave way to the mountains and valleys of California, until finally they arrived in San Francisco on a fog-shrouded September morning. Aunt Margaret, a formidable woman in her 50s with Hazel's amber eyes and a businesswoman's shrewd gaze, met them at the station. She embraced her niece warmly before appraising Quentin with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the cowboy who saved my Hazel," she said, offering her hand. "I suppose I should thank you for that, even if you are whisking her off to matrimony before she's had a proper chance to establish herself." "Aunt Margaret," Hazel protested, but Quentin merely laughed. "Madam, if you knew your niece at all, you'd know there's no whisking her anywhere she doesn't want to go," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I'm just along for the ride." A smile tugged at Margaret's lips. "Smart and handsome, perhaps you'll do after all." She turned briskly, gesturing for them to follow. "Come along, then. I've secured rooms for you both near the shop, separate rooms, mind you, until the wedding. This may be California, but I still maintain certain standards." Life in San Francisco proved to be everything Hazel had hoped for and more. Her aunt's shop, Madame Margaret's Fine Apparel, catered to the city's elite, women who thought nothing of spending small fortunes on the latest fashions. Hazel's fresh designs, influenced by her simpler Western aesthetic but elevated with luxurious fabrics, quickly became sought after among the younger clientele. Quentin, true to his word, found work at a prestigious stable that provided horses and carriages to the city's wealthy. His expertise with even the most difficult animals earned him the respect of his employers, and within months he was promoted to head groom, overseeing a staff of stable hands. They were married in November, in a small ceremony at Grace Cathedral with Aunt Margaret and a few new friends in attendance. Hazel wore a gown of her own design, ivory silk with delicate embroidery that echoed the desert flowers of Arizona, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming roses. Quentin, looking both uncomfortable and impossibly handsome in a tailored suit, fumbled only slightly when placing the gold band on her finger. "I, Quentin Xander, take thee, Hazel Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Hazel repeated the same vows, her voice clear and unwavering. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin's kiss was both reverent and promising, a perfect beginning to their life together. Aunt Margaret hosted a reception at her home in Pacific Heights, where champagne flowed freely, and the city's fashionable set mingled with the stable hands who had become Quentin's friends. As evening fell, the newlyweds slipped away to the small but elegant apartment that would be their first home together, a wedding gift from Margaret, who had declared that no niece of hers would begin married life in rented rooms. As Quentin carried Hazel across the threshold, she laughed with pure joy. "I never imagined my life would turn out this way," she confessed as he set her down gently. "When I was locked in that root cellar, certain I was going to die." "SHH," Quentin murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's all behind us now," Hazel nodded, leaning into his touch. "I know, it's just, sometimes I think about how easily we might never have met, if you hadn't been passing by at that exact moment, if you hadn't heard me." "But I did," Quentin said simply, "and now here we are." "Here we are," Hazel agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, "Mr. and Mrs. Xander." The name still felt new on her tongue, but right as his arms around her waist, as right as the life they were building together far from the dusty streets of Ash Fork. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The Spanish-American War briefly threatened to separate them when Quentin considered enlisting, but ultimately he remained in San Francisco, unwilling to leave Hazel and the life they had created. The devastating earthquake of 1906 destroyed Madame Margaret's shop, but with characteristic determination, the three of them rebuilt, creating an even more successful establishment that catered to women's changing fashion needs in the new century. They had children, 2 sons, and a daughter who grew up hearing the story of how their father had rescued their mother from a root cellar in the Arizona territory. As the children aged, the tale evolved, becoming more dramatic with each telling until it resembled one of the moving pictures that had begun to captivate the nation. It wasn't nearly that exciting, Hazel would protest as Quentin described galloping heroically to her rescue, 6 guns blazing. There were no shootouts, no daring escapes. "Don't ruin it, Ma," their eldest son, Joseph, would groan. "Pa's version is much better." And Quentin would wink at his wife over the children's heads, both of them knowing that the truth, while less cinematic, was no less remarkable for its simplicity. A man passing by, a woman in trouble, a choice made in an instant that altered the course of 2 lives forever. Faith remained in the asylum in Phoenix, gradually improving over the years until she was eventually transferred to a less restrictive facility. Hazel corresponded with her regularly and visited when they returned to Arizona to see old friends. Though their relationship would never be what it once was, they found a measure of peace in their shared history and the bond that had somehow survived even the darkest of betrayals. As for Henry, they heard he had married a banker's daughter in Los Angeles and gone into politics, serving briefly in the California state legislature before returning to private life. Hazel occasionally wondered what might have happened had she married him as planned, but such thoughts were fleeting, always dispersed by the reality of the life she had found, instead a life richer and more fulfilling than any she could have imagined on that terrible day in the root cellar. In 1915, as the Panama Pacific International Exposition transformed San Francisco into a gleaming tribute to human achievement, Quentin and Hazel celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They walked arm in arm through the dazzling court of the universe, marveling at the grand architecture and innovative exhibitions that seemed to herald a new age of possibility. "Did you ever think we'd see such wonders?" Hazel asked as they paused before the soaring tower of jewels, its 102,000 glass gems catching the sunlight in a prismatic display. Quentin squeezed her hand, his hair now streaked with silver but his gray eyes as clear and steady as the day they'd met. "The only wonder I need is right here beside me," Hazel laughed, the sound as youthful and joyous as it had been when they sat by the creek in Ash Fork all those years ago. "You've grown sentimental in your old age, Cowboy." "Not old," he corrected, pulling her close. "Experienced. And wise enough to know what matters." As they shared a kiss beneath the tower, surrounded by the crowds and commotion of the exposition, Hazel Jenkins Xander silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led Quentin to that lonely homestead outside Ash Fork. From the darkest moment of her life had come her greatest blessing, a love that had begun with a cry for help and grown into something that sustained them both through all the seasons of their lives. And in the years to come, whenever their grandchildren begged for the story of how they met, Hazel would always begin the same way. It started with a scream in a root cellar and ended with a kiss in San Francisco, and all the important parts happened in between.